So, in this video, we will try to answer some true or false questions concerning PAS 16, the standard governing your property, plant, and equipment. Number one, carrying amount is the amount at which an asset is recognized after deducting the accumulated depreciation and accumulated impairment losses. So this question class again focuses on mere definition of terms, and as I have repeatedly reminded you class, you should always take advantage of this question because these kind of questions does not require analysis on your part but merely tests your ability to remember definitions provided in the standard. And the statement provided in number one class is exactly the definition provided in PAS 16 with regard your carrying amount. I am sure I have told you before class that carrying amount will be defined in a lot of standards, and in some cases the definition may be different for every standard because the definition that will be given for carrying amount tend to be specific to the involved standard. So as regards the definition provided in number one class, I do not expect this to be a recurring question because the definition given here specifically applies only for your property, plant, and equipment. If you will be asked for the definition of carrying amount in its general use or the generally accepted definition for carrying amount, your carrying amount would simply be the amount in which the asset is carried or recorded in your statement of financial position. The amounts that you would see in your statement of financial position class represents the carrying amount of the asset. That would be our general or broad definition for carrying amount. But if you are specifically asked for the definition of carrying amount as far as PAS 16 is concerned, then it would be the amount at which an asset is recognized after deducting the accumulated depreciation and accumulated impairment losses. And if we are to scrutinize this definition class, this would still fall under our general definition for carrying amount because the amount that is recognized after deducting depreciation and impairment class would be the amount that would be reported in the statement of financial position. So this specific definition of carrying amount for PPE, for property, plant, and equipment, is still in accordance with the commonly accepted definition for carrying amount. So again, number one is true. This is taken verbatim from the standard class. Number two, depreciable amount is the cost of an asset or other amount substituted for cost less residual value. So even without studying PAS 16 or the subject before class, you are expected to have an idea already as to what depreciable amount is. Because in your discussion of basic accounting class, specifically during the preparation of adjusting entries, one of the commonly prepared adjusting entry is with regard to the recognition of your depreciation expense and the accumulated depreciation. And most books class discussing basic accounting would already attempt to teach the students on how to compute for the annual depreciation. Even if you are only using the simplest depreciation method, the straight line depreciation method, most basic accounting books already teaches you on how to compute for the annual depreciation. And for you to arrive at the annual depreciation class, you should have been introduced to the term depreciable amount. This is the amount that you will be depreciating in order to arrive at your annual depreciation. So basically, class, your depreciable amount is the cost or whatever was used as a carrying amount less your residual value. You exclude the residual value from the computation of your annual depreciation. Another way of understanding depreciable amount class would be that it represents the amount or the portion of the value of an asset class that will be consumed or recovered only through the continued use of the asset. If we're talking about long-term assets class, the recovery of the cost or the value of the asset would come in two ways. Either the value of the asset will be recovered through sale or disposal or through its continued use. So it's possible, class, that After using an asset, you will not be able to recover from it. And we do not consider that as a big problem because we do not see the cost of that asset as being completely lost. It is just that the value of that asset was recovered through its continued use. The benefit we derive from the asset is not from the value that we will get if we were to sell the asset, but from the value we derive when we continually use the asset in our business operations. But as far as the standards are concerned, class, definitely the definition provided in number 2 is the definition provided for depreciable amount. And that makes number 2 true. Number 3, impairment loss is the systematic allocation of the depreciable amount of an asset over its useful life. So again, class, this question still focuses on the definition of terms. If you'll recall our discussion on past 2 class, I have to some extent introduced you to the concept of impairment. We consider an asset as impaired, class, if its recoverable amount is lower than its carrying amount. If we go back to inventories, class, we consider inventory as impaired if its recoverable amount, which is in the case of inventory the net realizable value, is lower than its carrying amount, which is the cost as far as inventories are concerned. So for inventories, we say that they are impaired in case the net realizable value is lower than the cost of the inventories. But on a broad level, class, we consider assets as impaired if their recoverable amount is lower than their carrying amount. Now, as to what is the carrying amount for an asset may differ from one asset to another. As to what constitutes their recoverable amount may also differ from one asset to another. But all you have to remember, class, is that an asset will be impaired if its recoverable amount is lower than its carrying amount. And that rule also applies to property, plant, and equipment. But going back to number 3, class, definitely the systematic allocation of the depreciable amount of an asset over its useful life is not impairment loss. What number 3 is defining, class, is actually your depreciation. Depreciation is the systematic allocation of the depreciable amount of an asset over its useful life. And again, I have an expectation that you should have already encountered before the definition for depreciation when you discussed basic accounting. Number 4, fair value is the amount of cash or cash equivalents paid or the value of the other consideration given to acquire an asset at the time of its acquisition or construction. Class, the definition given in number 4 should be familiar, class. Number 4 is not fair value but is actually the cost. If you'll try to remember as to what constitutes cost for inventories, class, it would be very similar as to what is the definition given in number 4. So that means the concept of what cost is that was discussed in past 2 is similar to the concept of cost used in past 16. And if you also remember the definition of fair value, class, definitely the definition given in number 4 is not the definition for fair value we have learned in the past standards. If you'll recall the definition we've encountered in past 2 class, basically the fair value is the amount that you expect to sell an asset or the amount you expect to pay for an asset in an orderly transaction between willing market participants. Throughout the standard, that would be the definition used for fair value, which is the definition provided by PFRS 13, the standard that was specifically issued to govern fair value measurement. So again, number 4 is false. What is defined in number 4 is cost and not fair value.